I didn't even realize something was wrong at first. The day of my father's funeral felt like I was moving through water, everything slow and muffled, my chest heavy in a way I had never felt before. I remember standing near the front of the chapel, hands folded so tightly my fingers hurt, listening to the soft murmur of people offering condolences, and thinking only one thing over and over again: my dad is really gone. He had been my anchor my whole life, the calm voice I called when I didn't know what to do, and suddenly I was standing there without him, surrounded by flowers and grief and the sound of my brother crying louder than anyone else. Growing up, it had always been the three of us: my dad, my older brother Mark, and me. Our mother passed away when I was in college, and after that, Dad tried his best to keep us together. Mark was always the loud one, the confident one, the one who spoke for the family. I was quieter, more organized, the one who handled paperwork and schedules. Dad used to joke that Mark had the charm and I had the sense. I didn't see that as a divide back then. I thought it balanced us. When Dad got sick, everything changed slowly, almost gently at first. Hospital visits became routine, conversations got shorter, and decisions had to be made. That was when Dad sat me down at his kitchen table one evening, his hand shaking slightly as he slid a folder across to me. He told me he wanted me to be the executor of his will, because I paid attention to details, and I didn't let emotions cloud judgment. I remember telling him not to talk like that he wasn't going anywhere, but he just smiled in that tired way and said he wanted peace of mind. I agreed, not realizing how much weight that decision would carry. At the funeral, Mark was playing his role perfectly. He hugged everyone, cried openly, talked about how much Dad meant to him. People kept telling me how strong my brother was, how lucky I was to have him. I nodded and smiled because that's what you do when you're exhausted and grieving. It wasn't until after the service, when we gathered in a small room behind the chapel, that I noticed something off. Mark pulled out a folded stack of papers from his jacket and started talking to our relatives in a low but confident voice. I caught fragments of words at first. House. Will. Dad wanted. I felt a tightness in my stomach, but I told myself it was just the stress of the day. Then my aunt looked at me with a confused expression and asked, "So you knew your father changed the will, right?" The room felt like it tilted. I asked her what she meant, trying to keep my voice steady. She glanced at Mark, then back at me, and said he had just told everyone Dad left him the house. The $2.4 million house that had been in our family for decades. I looked at my brother, expecting him to laugh it off, to say there had been a misunderstanding. Instead, he met my eyes with a look I didn't recognize. It wasn't grief. It wasn't shock. It was something colder, almost relieved. He told me quietly that Dad had updated the will shortly before he passed and that everything was handled. He said it like he was doing me a favor by explaining. I felt heat rise in my face, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. I just nodded slowly, my mind racing, because I knew exactly what my father had signed, and I knew exactly who had legal authority over his estate. I stepped outside to get some air, my hands shaking so badly I had to press them against my thighs. Part of me wanted to scream, to confront him right there in front of everyone, but another part of me, the part my father trusted enough to name Executor, told me to stay calm. If Mark was lying, there would be proof, and if he wasn't, then something was very, very wrong. As the sound of the funeral faded behind me, I realized that the grief I felt for my father was now tangled with something else entirely: betrayal. And I knew, deep down, that this wasn't over. Not even close. The days after the funeral blurred together, but the unease never left. Mark started acting like everything had already been decided. Like the house was his and the rest was just paperwork waiting to catch up. He talked about renovations, about renting part of it out, about how Dad would have wanted him to keep it in the family. Every time he spoke, it felt like a small cut, because I could hear Dad's voice in my head saying the exact opposite. Dad believed in fairness. He believed in doing things the right way. I finally asked Mark to show me the will he claimed Dad had signed. He hesitated for just a second too long before saying it was with his lawyer and that I didn't need to worry about it. That was the moment something inside me hardened. I reminded him, calmly, that I was the executor and that legally, everything went through me. He laughed, not loudly, but dismissively, and said I was being emotional because I was grieving. That laugh hurt more than the lie itself. It told me he thought I was weak. That night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out the original documents Dad had given me months before he died. His will was clear, detailed, and properly signed. The house was to be sold, with the proceeds split evenly between us. There were no last-minute changes, no hidden clauses. I read it again and again, just to be sure. My hands were steady now, my grief turning into focus. If Mark had a different version, it meant only one thing. He had forged it. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I called the estate attorney my father had worked with for years. When I explained what was happening, his tone shifted from sympathetic to serious. He told me to bring in everything I had and not to say another word to my brother until we reviewed the documents. Sitting in that office a few days later, listening as the attorney compared signatures and dates, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness that my brother could do this, relief that the truth was clear. The forgery wasn't even subtle. The signature didn't match, the witnesses were questionable, the date didn't line up with my father's medical records. Each detail felt like another confirmation of something I hadn't wanted to believe about Mark. When the attorney said the words, "This won't hold up in court," I exhaled for the first time in days. But the pain was still there, heavy and raw. This wasn't just about a house. It was about trust and how easily it had been broken. I spent one night sitting on my couch, staring at the ceiling, letting myself feel everything I had been pushing down. I cried for my dad, for the family I thought I had, and for the version of my brother I no longer recognized. But somewhere in that emotional mess, a decision formed. I wasn't going to yell or beg or fight him in public. I was going to let the truth speak for itself. Quietly, legally, completely. When Mark finally received the formal notice from the attorney's office, he showed up at my door unannounced. His face was red, his voice sharp as he accused me of trying to steal from him, of disrespecting Dad's memory. I listened without interrupting, watching him unravel, and for the first time, I saw fear behind his anger. When he demanded to know what I was going to do, I told him the truth. I told him I was simply doing my job as executor. Nothing more, nothing less. And as I closed the door behind him, I knew the next chapter of this story would force everything into the open. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Once the forged will was officially challenged, everything Mark thought he had secured began to slip away. The attorney handled most of the communication, which was exactly how I wanted it. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to explain myself to extended family members who had already chosen sides based on incomplete information. I let the documents do the talking. Dates, signatures, records. Facts don't get emotional, and they don't lie. Mark tried to fight it at first. He hired his own lawyer, claimed Dad had verbally promised him the house, claimed I was manipulating the situation. Sitting across from him in the conference room during mediation was surreal. This was the same brother who used to sneak me snacks when Dad wasn't looking, who once stayed up all night helping me study for an exam. Now he wouldn't even meet my eyes. When the evidence was laid out piece by piece, his arguments fell apart. The forged will was officially invalidated. The original stood. The moment the mediator confirmed that I was, in fact, the executor and that the estate would proceed according to my father's wishes, something shifted in the room. Mark went quiet. The confidence he had carried since the funeral drained from his face. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just sat there, staring at the table as if the weight of his own actions had finally caught up to him. I felt no triumph in that moment, just a deep, aching sadness for how far things had gone. The house was sold a few months later, just like Dad wanted. The money was divided evenly, no special favors, no hidden advantages. Mark barely spoke to me during that time, and when he did, it was through short, guarded messages about logistics. I kept everything professional because that's what my father trusted me to do. When it was all over, when the final documents were signed and filed, I sat in my car and cried. Not because I had won, but because I had lost something I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Time has a way of settling things into perspective. Looking back now, I understand that the hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself, but accepting that protecting myself didn't make me cruel. It made me irresponsible. Being the executor didn't mean choosing sides. It meant honoring my father's wishes, even when it hurt, even when it cost me the relationship I thought I had with my brother. I still think about Dad often, especially when I pass by the old neighborhood where the house once stood. I imagine him nodding quietly, approving of how things were handled. And while my relationship with Mark remains distant, I've learned something important through all of this. Trust is precious, but boundaries are necessary. Love doesn't mean allowing someone to rewrite the truth. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand calmly in your integrity and let the consequences fall where they may.